Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. My name is Susan Pincus and I'm the National Careers Professional with the College of Law. I'm very excited to be here and welcome you all to our session today, which is on the topic of working abroad and how to build your legal career in a new country. And I would like to just very briefly introduce you to our three panelists, and then we'll do an acknowledgement of the country, and then we'll kick off our webinar. So we have with us three very lovely panelists. We've got Kelvin Eng, we have Joanna Abraham, and we have Simran Joshi. And the area that we're going to focus on, or in terms of kind of like the outcomes for our session today, there are three. We're going to talk about the issues that you may face and how to keep a positive mindset when dealing with knockbacks. We're also going to talk very briefly about just the qualification, conversion and accreditation process. That will probably be, Simran will give us a bit of an overview of her experience. And then practical steps to building your profile and taking charge of your narrative. So welcome again to those that are still coming on board. I'd like to just start with an acknowledgement of the country. So as we gather for this afternoon's webinar, we recognise that many of us are on different lands of different traditional custodians. I would like to acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the lands we are all present on today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this skills suite. I pay my respects to each of their elders past, present and emerging. So back to our panelists, I just wanted to introduce you all. So just starting with Kelvin Eng. Kelvin is an associate in the litigation team at Norton Rose Fulbright, specialising in regulatory investigations and disputes, specifically in the areas of competition, consumer, corporations and privacy law. Kelvin graduated from Monash University with a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Laws, and is also a College of Law alumni. Outside of work, Kelvin is the president of the Victorian branch of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association, where he has been extensively involved in student engagement. In terms of his cultural background, Kelvin was born in Hong Kong and speaks three languages: Cantonese, Mandarin, and French. Welcome, Kelvin. Joanna Abraham. So Joanna is a lecturer at the College of Law and has practiced extensively in immigration and refugee law, having recently been awarded the Justice Award at the 2020 Victorian Multicultural Awards for excellence for this work. Born in Singapore and of Indian heritage, Joanna has lived both in Canada and Australia. Being a migrant herself, Joanna is passionate about championing diversity, both in the legal profession and also in the wider community. She is the co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at Victorian Women Lawyers and sits on the boards of the Victorian Immigrant and Refugee Women's Coalition and the AFRI Auschare. You're very, very busy. It's a lot of committees. And Simran is a dual qualified Indian and Australian lawyer, and she works in the Wills and Estates team with Sladen Legal, having been with them since December 2019. Prior to coming to Australia, Simran practiced as a lawyer in India, running her own successful business as the founder of Will Expert for just under 6 years. Here she provided succession planning services to clients and conducted workshops to create awareness about the importance of making a will. After migrating to Australia with her husband and young family, Simran had to do additional study through completion of her PLT at the College of Law, as well as a Bachelor of Laws at Deakin University. So welcome to our three panelists. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off and each person is going to just answer a few questions. So we're going to move around our different panelists. And then if at around 4:45, we'll kick off with some questions. So if you're all able to just write your questions into the Q&A as opposed to chat, because it gets a little bit complicated for me. I find it difficult just to be going from one to the other. So if you could just try and do it in Q&A, it just makes it easier as the facilitator. And if we run out of time, we don't get through all the questions, I will have a record of all the questions and I'll be able to get back to you via email. So we're going to kick off. Let's get started. So starting with you, Simran, where do we start? How did you manage the major transition coming from India, where you ran your own successful small legal practice, to when you first arrived in Australia and had to start all over again?
Yeah, so in India, I worked across areas, starting from legal publishing, running legal web portal, being an in-house legal consultant for outsourcing to US attorneys. And then finally, I set up my own wills and estates business, running my own sole practice. Then in 2016, the kids were growing up and we decided that, as a family, we need some, the kids and the family will need some international exposure, and it'll be, more opportunities for them. And, for a better quality of life, that we decided to move out of India. So first we moved to Singapore. We were there for a year or so. And then we moved to Melbourne, Australia. And it was a big transition for the whole family. It wasn't, the change was sudden and a big one. There weren't many people that we knew here, and it was like initially I was quite clueless as to where to start, and of course I had to start from scratch, and there was a lot of confusion as to how to fit into a new culture first. Understanding the new culture. So the start was from meeting people around, in the local community, getting to, attend some events here and, workshops. And I remember I would just go and attend any events that were happening around my community. So, for example, there were the totally unrelated ones, like, how to build a LinkedIn profile, or this was easier because that was pre-COVID and there were events which were happening in person, not like now, which are happening through Zoom. I understand that it's a bit difficult at this time, but there was something like, advertising your business on Facebook, how to do it. So it was the whole intention was to get to know people around my community and, understand the culture.
So it wasn't just within the legal, sorry, Simran, to interject you, it wasn't just within the legal realm.
No, so,
yeah.
So, getting the first step into the legal industry was a bit far off. This was the first step to first get to know the people and the culture here, to, get on to the second step. So the building the network was important for me. Then one connection led to the other, and I would come across also in the legal community. I would come across people who would who would say, why wills and estates? People who are lawyers who are migrant lawyers would get into an area like immigration or family law. So, but I had my focus clear, and I knew my passion, that it was wills and estates, and that's what I was looking at. So I kept building the connections and the relationships, and but that first breakthrough wasn't happening. So I was like, okay. Then I looked at volunteering. So why not make a difference to the community, being of value to others and of service to others, and and I started exploring those opportunities, and I came across VIRIP. That's a Center for Multicultural Youth. It's an independent persons program. These volunteer independent persons, they support young people under 18 years with police interviews. So that's one area that I explored. I could help with, and make a difference to the community. Then there were community legal centers, but I found that it was a bit tough to get a volunteering opportunity there because there were so many contenders for those positions, because it's quite renowned, and you get a lot of experience getting there. Recently, I came across this HIV and AIDS center, legal center. So I have accepted a volunteer opportunity, for once a week for 2 hours, volunteering. So that's how my initial journey began. So networking, volunteering, and that's how it all started. And
yeah, I love that. I love that kind of giving back to the community and starting with that premise as well. That's great. We're going to just move on to Joanna, and perhaps this is I think a really interesting question. In terms of you being a migrant, how has that impacted, would you say, on your career path?
It's actually had a massive impact on my career path, but it wasn't always the case. I think when I moved to Australia, like Simran, as a migrant, even though I moved when I was in year 11, so it wasn't as much of a culture shock for me, even though the first couple of years of high school were interesting, to say the least. And people were going around asking about thongs, and for me, I always thought thongs were, something that shouldn't be mentioned. So when students were yelling it out to teachers in high school, I had a bit of a culture shock there too. But for me, I think I came a little bit later in the piece to really acknowledging the breadth of goodness that being a migrant and all of those experiences brought. I think the first sort of 8 to 10 years of my life in Australia, I very much tried to not engage in that because I felt that it would put me at a disadvantage almost. It wasn't until I became a lawyer and I started working with migrants that I realized what a true benefit it was to have all of that experience, because one of the very first times my language skills, for example, came to be put to good use is when I had a Tamil Sri Lankan client, a refugee client, and there was a shortage of Tamil interpreters. And so we had a fast approaching deadline that needed to be met. And I kind of very gingerly put my hand up and said, I can speak Tamil, even though when I was in Singapore studying it, it really I wasn't the best at all. If you ask anyone who knew me back home, they'll back me up in that. But I kind of re-engaged with my culture because of the work that I did as a lawyer. That language skill then translated to understanding the culture and the community and the tradition that goes along with being a migrant. And that, I think, really helped me, not just to be a better lawyer, but a better person as well. And I think that sort of informed all of my decisions since over the last sort of 8 to 10 years now. And I think I'm truly a better person for it.
Okay, that's fabulous. Thank you for sharing that. Kelvin, perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about your journey to date. And specifically, I just thought it might be interesting for you to take us through the William, is it Arquette Scholarship? And also, how did you become involved with the AALA as well?
Sure, I'm more than happy to speak to that. So it actually arose out of a conversation that occurred as part of the graduate induction program. There was a session on diversity and inclusion with a particular emphasis on cultural diversity. This elicited a strong response and gave rise to some fairly heated but very constructive conversations. But the conversation didn't stop there. A colleague of mine, Ming Callan, asked if I'd be interested in collaborating with him to write a 10,000-word paper about equality, diversity, and the law. Well, sorry, 5,000 rather. And being a sucker for pain, I was like, sure, why not? So after many hours of research, discussing, drafting, redrafting, copious blood, sweat, and tears, maybe not blood, we ended up submitting a paper. And what happened next was actually a bit of a whirlwind. We were told that we'd been shortlisted, then flown up to Sydney, and before we knew it, we were shaking hands with President Margaret Beazley of the New South Wales Court of Appeal. She then was, now the Governor General of New South Wales. It was all very surreal. And there was actually a national roundtable scheduled for the next day. And having just accepted a check for $3,000, I did feel kind of obliged to stick around and at least show my face. But when I went, I was pleasantly surprised when I encountered a bunch of people with a shared passion for cultural diversity in the law and felt a strong sense of community, other people who knew what it was like to be in the same boat. And so I thought I'd put up my hand and join the committee, which is what I did, and it's snowballed from there. So initially I was particularly involved in the student engagement aspect, building relationships with educational institutions, both PLT providers such as College of Law, Leo Cousin, universities, as well as directly on the ground with students, both the general student societies and those with a focus on social justice and equity. And as of late last year, I decided to step up to the presidency, and that's been a very interesting experience in that I'm far from the most experienced lawyer on the committee, and it's really more about how I can get the other committee members to draw the most out of the other committee members. It's not so much about always being in the spotlight myself. I see my role as a president as kind of being like directing traffic. And it's great that I'm able to do something meaningful outside of just work on a topic that's very close to my heart.
Okay, all right. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the association as well. Just going back to Simran, if you could just take us through the process of requalifying, the fact that, you know, you had to go back to study and also going back to kind of paralegal roles as well. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what the process was for that?
Yes, so in Victoria, for requalifying, you need to apply to the Victorian Legal Admission Board here for a foreign lawyer assessment. So you have to submit all your documents with respect to your foreign qualifications, and mostly they come back to you with the assessment within 8 weeks or so, if I remember correctly. And on a case-to-case basis, you know, VLAB will require you to do a certain number of law units or subjects in order to bridge to kind of, you know, the bridging program. And I got 6 units to do. That's, you know, after the assessment, and plus the practical legal training, which is around 4 to 4.5 months if you do it full time. And I think it's around 8 to 9 months if it's a part-time one. So all of that. So I enrolled myself at Deakin University after I got my assessment done to do those units, and it was an online study. But I mean, if I would, you know, share my experience, and it was quite daunting to go back to studies. I know so many people who, you know, you know, so many times people ask me this question that, oh my God, you know, how did you study again? It was like, you know, after so many years, you know, it was equally daunting for me. The most daunting part was the examinations, you know, sitting with, you know, 200 other people and taking that exam in that 2.5 hours. That was the most scary bit. So, and I was working part-time initially and then full-time, and along with studying full-time, you know, studying for this and working full-time. It wasn't easy, and I would squeeze in a couple of hours each night after work, and a few more hours on the weekend. Cut back on social engagements during examination time. But I think what you know, kept me going was once I decided, I jumped in, then there wasn't any looking back. And you know, once you start it, I think, in fact, I would, you know, people who you know, want to requalify or are thinking about it, my advice would be, you know, don't hesitate to study or take exams again. It's actually, it's all in the mind. It's a mental block, and once you go past that, you know, it's the first step actually, you know, to it's first step that gets you on that ladder, you know. So,
I mean, Simran, you didn't even mention the fact that you had a family as well, and you had to settle your children into school and things. So, I mean, it sounds like, yeah, you were just like juggling so many different balls. It would have been very difficult.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah, I mean, talking about the, as you mentioned, the paralegal roles, initially when I landed into Australia, nobody would even offer me the paralegal roles, because they would say no recruiter will talk. They will say you don't have local experience. So, but I kept my inhibitions aside, kept on networking, and I was okay to get hold of any opportunity that came my way, whether it was volunteering or paralegal roles. And I think one connection led to the other, and I met some wonderful people along my way, and they helped and supported me, and got me going. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Joanna, do you want to just take us through, I mean, that you are involved in so many different committees and boards as well, and kind of what is the driver behind all that involvement? And yeah, perhaps you could just talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, that all kind of really came about very organically. You wouldn't believe it now, Susan, knowing me, but I was actually a real wallflower, and I wouldn't want to speak unless I absolutely had to. I used to really be that person at networking events who would hug the wall and just look at my watch and wait for the appropriate time to walk out the door. But I think the way all of this sort of came about is that I really always followed my passions. Even when it was in law school, I knew for a fact that no offense to Kelvin, but I never wanted to practice in corporate or commercial law. That was just never going to be my thing, because I knew from a really young age that I was all about like Simran community and focusing on how I could, make a difference to the communities that really needed it the most. So from a very early stage, I always just focused my energies on figuring out how I could add value in those capacities. And so like Simran, I just started volunteering at community legal centres, and it was really, really hard. I was quite lucky in the sense that my law school offered a direct pathway to a community legal centre. And from there, I was able to then network. Like Simran said, I think it's so important to network and just to meet everyone genuinely as you go along, and to know that every single person has a story to share. I think that's really, really important, to have that mentality as you're going through not just the law, but I think life in general. And through that, through those connections that I made, I then really figured out that community law was the area for me. And I wanted to be sure that whatever I ended up in, it was in a position that I would be able to make a difference in. So as I sort of then got my first job out of law school, and I was really strategic in applying for positions that I knew I would enjoy working in, because I didn't want to end up, like I said, working in corporate law where I knew for a fact I wouldn't be enjoying it. And if I did enjoy it, my clients would then suffer the cost for that. And I would then suffer the cost for that, because it affects your mental health and it just affects the way you go about life in general. So I was really strategic when I was applying for positions out of law school, and I was really lucky to get one at a firm that practiced in immigration and refugee law. And from there, I think it's just constantly been about finding ways that I can do more for more people. And so even after I got a job, I didn't stop volunteering. I volunteered at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, at Refugee Legal. And I think this really gave me an opportunity to see how each facet of society and community were being treated throughout the course of engaging with the legal system. And it was because of this that I realized that it wasn't just enough to be a lawyer. Sometimes you're going to have to put on a different hat, especially with the kind of clients that I came across who really had a lot of trauma associated with, just life in general. So it's through this that I started volunteering in organizations that were outside the law. And actually, it was really, really funny. My first board position, I didn't even know that I was being interviewed for a board position. I went along thinking that they wanted me to perhaps do some family violence sessions for the Victorian Immigrant and Refugee Women's Coalition. And so I was catching up with the chairwoman and sort of talking about family violence in the context of immigration law. And then the questions that she was asking me were really pointed towards sort of leadership. And, I was a little bit confused throughout that interview, but I just sort of like brushed it off. And then the next day I got an email saying, we would like to appoint you to the board. And I was like, oh, okay then, great. I like did not see that one coming at all. But I think that's like that really is strong evidence to show that if you just do what you love, and obviously I know that not everyone ends up getting that the first go. I was so lucky that I ended up loving what I did. But I think you just really need to know exactly what you want to get out of being a lawyer, and just get out of being a person, and the impact that you want to leave on community as a whole. And in terms of finding the time to do it, I guess you just have to make it work. Like Simran, she juggled a young family, she juggled moving to a new country. So where there's a will, there's a way. I think you just always have to say yes. If an opportunity comes up that you find interesting or that you think you might like, say yes to it. You know, if you think it's a little bit outside your comfort zone, all the more reason for you to say yes, because I think those are the opportunities that really push you to be better and do better. Being the co-chair of the Victorian Women's Lawyers Diversity and Inclusion Committee, that's not something I went looking for. It's something that I was really passionate about, like Kelvin, because I was looking around me and I didn't see much in terms of people who looked like me in sort of the higher echelons of leadership. So that's something I sort of went along to on a whim, just to, you know, get a feel for having more women as compatriots in the legal industry. And it sort of burgeoned into being on the D&I committee, and then they offered me the co-chair position, and so it's just kind of gone from there. So I guess my strong advice to anyone who's looking to get into the market or to make a name for yourself is to never lose sight of who you are and where you've come from and what's important to you. And always do things that come from your heart, because if not, it really is quite evident to someone who's perhaps interviewing you for a position that your heart's not really in it. So just be sure to be true to yourself and be proud of your heritage and where you come from, because I think those things in today's day and age are real assets that we should be proud to I guess display to the legal profession and the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really love that, how you talk about like leveraging your cultural background, and also like specifically, Kelvin, moving on to you in terms of how you used your background as a source of competitive advantage as well in your applications. I remember you telling us about going through the application process here, which was incredibly demanding. Do you want to just talk us through how that went, and kind of the advantages of having a diverse background, and how you can kind of play them up and showcase them through the recruitment process?
Sure. So I'm really happy with where I am now, but it definitely wasn't always smooth sailing. And I think that hopefully means that students can take from this that things will work out one way or another, even if it seems like the end of the world at the time. So back in my penultimate year, I applied for clerkships like people do, although I don't think at that point I quite realized how crucial they were to securing grad roles. More on this later. I thought I was sitting reasonably well. I had decent marks, working at a boutique commercial law firm on the side, volunteered at a CLC, had extracurricular experience. Thought I ticked all the boxes. And on this, I think, yes, marks are important in that they often serve as a threshold that employers use to filter out candidates, but they're only one part of the equation. What firms are looking for are well-rounded individuals. It's a combination of all of those things: academics, work experience, extracurriculars, and probably most importantly, how you present in the interview itself, that nebulous notion of cultural fit. But anyway, back to my story. In my penultimate year, I applied and missed out. I'd interviewed at a number of firms. It was close, but no cigar. I thought, that's fine. I'll try again in my final year. So final year came around, and the LIV synchronizes most of the dates. When I clicked on the link for where the graduate roles were being advertised, there were exactly 0 positions available, at which point I realized I have made a huge mistake. The clerkship process is highly streamlined, and in that, I'd say probably about 80% of graduate roles are secured via clerkships. And it was frustrating because I wasn't being given the opportunity to demonstrate, not even been given a chance. And this is even more so for international students, because the requirements around visas ruled them out of a lot of roles. And I should also emphasize that, notwithstanding that I work at a corporate and commercial firm, I definitely agree with Joanna and Simran that it's not the be-all and end-all. It's often sold as the traditional career path, but there is so much more out there. It's worth exploring different alternatives. And if corporate and commercial law is truly something that you're passionate about, it's certainly possible to break in outside of that clerkship grad role process. But anyway, there were 2 remaining days before clerkship applications closed. And despite being a final year student, I thought may as well give it a go. And having sharpened up my CV, my cover letter and the like, I did get a higher strike rate. I think I applied for 10 places over the course of 2 days, which I would not recommend. But I think I interviewed at 4 of them, and I actually landed a clerkship at a firm. And so they pulled a bit of a dodge. They were like, we'll give you an early clerkship with a view to being considered as a graduate next year. I, for one, certainly wasn't complaining. So I went there, did the clerkship, and then come November, just after I'd finished exams, got a call saying, hi, thanks very much for clerking with us. We thought you were great, but we've decided to go with another candidate. And I think that was a low point for me personally. It's really hard not to take rejections personally. It's a sort of reflection on you, right? And there's always that niggling question of, was it because I wasn't the best candidate? Or was it because of the color of my skin or factors outside of your own control? And I think, but I sort of swallowed my pride, went back and asked for feedback. And what they said was, your legal analysis skills, research skills were great, as were your oral and written communication abilities. You just need to relax more. At the time, I thought that was supremely unhelpful. What does that even mean? But in hindsight, it was actually really good advice.
Yeah.
I think because I'd viewed that clerkship process as the sort of career path that I had to follow, this was my last chance to get on the escalator. And that meant I had the weight of expectation on me. And when you're on edge, I think it colors your interactions with other people and makes them anxious too. But anyway, I also didn't really want to bring sort of people around me down, in that a lot of them were out there, getting graduation trips, celebrating their grad roles. But I found that when I did actually reach out, people were really supportive. And I think you shouldn't be sort of afraid to make yourself vulnerable. But anyway, come December of that year, I applied for my current role, which was being advertised. Didn't hear back for about a month. And I thought, didn't get it. But in actuality, it was probably that HR was on Christmas break. Had the interview, and I have to say it was hands down the weirdest interview I'd had. And this is where we come to the cultural aspect. So at one point, I'd sort of loosened up a bit, and this goes back towards the anxiety. I thought I had nothing left to lose. So I started doing impressions of firms. They loved them. But then they were like, what about Norton Rose Fulbright? Pause for a second. Norton Rose Fulbright is a leader. It was the first in the wave of global mergers in the Australian context. And it's got a strong foothold in the Asia Pacific region, which I'm well positioned to leverage, given my cultural background. And evidently they bought it because they hired me. So
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just one final note, observation, if I may. I realized that this is definitely the exception, not the rule, like a unicorn market grad role. And I think in terms of the numbers, it's a highly competitive marketplace out there. So I'm sure all our law students and PLT graduates are all too keenly aware. I think there are about 900 people who applied, and they ended up hiring 3. But I think that it actually makes you hungry. It makes you want it more, facing adversity, such that when opportunities do come your way, you make the most of them.
Thanks so much, Kelvin, for sharing that. And it's great to hear that, because it's not easy, and there is a lot of rejection involved in this whole recruitment process. But you've all kind of got back on and kept going. So that's testament to your tenacity and resilience. I just noticed that the questions, there's quite a lot of questions that are coming in. So just a couple of last ones. I wanted to just know, going back to you, Simran, in terms of how important was your mindset and what kept you focused, because that would have been very, very difficult at times.
Yes, so I would be lying if I would say that, things weren't difficult, or it was, and if I say be positive, and, obviously the mindset is extremely important, but it won't resonate if I say, and you would ask me how to be positive, So, you have to understand that there will be failures and there will be setbacks. But then when you encounter a setback, that's time to pause and reflect. That's what, I feel, and I do that and see, where I have come from, where I've reached, and what's the big picture. So look at your whole journey and don't get disheartened. The key is, I think, not to give up. So, just take the lesson from the setback and keep going. That's what I would say. And what kept me focused was, I think I would give full points here to my family who supported me, extreme. They're extremely proud, my husband and my kids. And, there's a joke in the family that say, she's the first in the family with an Australian degree. Before even my kids could get one.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And I think keeping my inhibitions away and managing priorities, what needs to be done at a particular time is done. That's, taking care of that. So that's extremely important, I would say.
Thank you. Joanna, what would you say in terms of just building your professional profile for people from overseas, or even people from Australia that are looking to practice overseas? What types of things do you think are important in terms of building your profile that we possibly haven't touched on?
I think in terms of building a profile, it's really important to remember that you might go to a networking event, for example, and I'll give you a bit of context. So when I initially started going to networking events in law school, all anyone wanted to talk about was cricket or the footy, and I knew nothing about those things. And so I feel completely disheartened because not only did I not know anyone in the legal profession and I was starting from scratch, but I also felt like I didn't share any of the same interests. So it took me a real long while to realize that was okay. And what I needed to do was to bring a bit of myself into the conversation, because, sorry, because I think the amazing thing about living in a country like Australia is that it's so diverse, it's so multicultural. It's unfortunate that that's not really reflected in professions like the legal profession, but I think we're getting there. We're slowly but surely getting there. But don't forget that you yourself come with a whole plethora of different and varied experiences. So don't be afraid to bring out that part of yourself. So I started talking about food because as a Singaporean, I love food, and I found like that was so well received. Everyone loved Singapore and everyone loved food. So that's something that I started bonding with people over and talking about, spice levels and the different kinds of drinks that you can have with the different kinds of food in Singapore. Where was the best place to get some noodles, I'm so sorry.
You might need some water.
I'm all right. It's just have a bit of a residual cough, but it's okay. It's not COVID, I promise. But that's how it sort of started for me when I realized that I don't have to fit myself into this tiny little box that I thought everyone needed to fit in. I could just make my own little box and invite people to my bubble and share things that were interesting and important to me. And that, when I started doing that, I found this new sense of confidence because I wasn't trying to be someone else. I was just being myself. And that, I think, like Kelvin said, it stopped me being so uptight and just so afraid to talk to people because I was afraid that they wouldn't like me. I think you just really need to back yourself. I think a lot of people starting out, or even, in the first sort of 5 years of their careers, feel like there's a bit of imposter syndrome in all of us. I still look back and I can't believe that I am where I am, but at the same time, I'm still constantly questioning myself. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? It doesn't really end. I think it's a constant journey of self-improvement. But I think in terms of making a name for yourself, you just really have to be yourself because there's only one of you, and you just have to be proud of that and own that and talk about it. And that's the way I think you build your brand. You build your brand around things that are passionate to you and things that you care about and you love. And I think stop trying to be like everyone else, because it's really not a fun process, first of all, and it just doesn't work. You know, be proud of your differences. I think they really enhance who we are as a community and as a profession. So yeah, that would be my advice. I think just make sure to be yourself. Don't try and fit into a box, even if someone's trying to make you fit into a box. Resist that and bring your whole self to work. Bring your whole self to any, you know, interview or any networking event, and just really don't be afraid to shine.
That's great advice. That's really very, very wise words there. Kelvin, just a last question, and then we'll go on to questions from the audience. In terms of how, like, the AALA can assist, like, overseas lawyers and international students, do you want to just very briefly mention that?
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to provide a brief plug. I'll keep it. In summary, I think as an overseas foreign qualified lawyer or international student, the odds are stacked against you. There are structural barriers like getting accredited, restrictions on working. It makes it harder to break into the profession, and there's a smaller pool of opportunities available. Then you've got to contend with overt racism, but also unconscious bias. And perhaps most damagingly, there's the lack of pre-existing connections within the field. You're coming in fresh. It's a process of trial and error. There's no one to clue you in on the ins and outs and give you a leg up. So I think a big part of what we do is seeking to bridge that knowledge gap so as to enable lawyers to compete on a more level playing field. And this includes getting creative, considering left of field options, like working in other jurisdictions, or using your cultural and linguistic background to your advantage, in that there are firms who value that. And this can be both tangible skills, but also the soft skills. And going back to what I was saying earlier about cultural fit, I think a lot of what whether you get hired comes down to, well, like, let's be honest, there are more than enough people out there who could do the job. Yes, it requires some degree of intellectual rigor, attention to detail, but there are lots of capable individuals out there. So when it comes to making the decision, it's really a question of, are you the kind of person that they want to spend 40 plus hours in an office, well, maybe not in an office in light of COVID, with? And that's a really hard thing to nail. It's about being likable. And a lot of that is those unspoken, unwritten rules of the game. And it's something that you can only really learn by a process of osmosis, because, you know, lawyers speak a certain way, they think a certain way. And it's not about sort of molding yourself to fit within that pre-existing norm, but there are just these little things that can be the straw that breaks the camel's back in such a competitive environment. But in addition to that sort of upskilling element, I think a lot of it is about having that supportive network there, a strong sense of community, a sense of identity and belonging.
Thank you. All right, we might just move over to questions. So if anyone wants to answer them, please feel free. So as an Australian admitted lawyer, if we move to the Asian areas, which areas of law and which jurisdiction would be the smart choice? So maybe, Kelvin, you want to answer that one.
Sure, I'm happy to have a go at fielding that. So when it comes to areas of law, there's a bit of a dichotomy between front end and back end law. Front end law is when things are going well, it's all deals and handshakes. And then after the proverbial hits the fan, then you move into back end law, where people are pointing fingers and suing each other. So as a general rule, in the front end space, laws tend to be a bit more standardized internationally, whether this be sort of debt agreements, merger agreements, and because of the multinational nature of that, whereas when it comes to disputes, they tend to be more jurisdiction specific. So I previously rotated through the banking and finance team at my firm. And in that context, I interacted with colleagues, clients, and stakeholders, Canada, Germany, Singapore, Hong Kong, basically you name it, we worked with people there. So that would be my general recommendation. And the sort of second, shorter, further response would be that there is sort of some alignment, particularly with common law jurisdictions. So, for instance, the legal system in Hong Kong is quite similar to that of Australia. And I know that, for instance, University of Melbourne and Monash University hold an annual Hong Kong Law Careers Fair, where those firms come down to recruit Australian talent.
Okay, thank you. Simran, this one's for you. This person said that they're an Indian lawyer completing their JD in Australia. How did you highlight to recruiters about your transferable skills?
I think being an Indian lawyer, since you have the common law background, and similar to what Australia offers, so that's something you can highlight and say, obviously it is easier for than in the civil law jurisdiction. And the other thing which I could be, they could say is, they bring in global skills. You worked in multicultural environment. You understand because Australia is definitely a migrant country. So there are people from, multiple countries living here. So, you bring all of the skills here. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. I'm a Malaysian lawyer currently working in-house in Singapore. I'll be applying for admission by the end of the year. Would the prospects of securing a position in an in-house legal department be better than getting a job in law practice? I don't know who wants to answer that one.
I'm happy to go at filling it.
Sure.
So I think at the entry level, it is probably a bit harder to break in-house. There are some sort of paralegal style roles, but often they don't have that sort of overt graduate recruitment process. Instead, what they prefer to do is wait for lawyers to have practiced for probably a number of years, 2 years post-admission, such that the training wheels come off in the form of the supervised legal practice condition, and such that the lawyers are able to jump in and sort of immediately start adding value. That said, it definitely shouldn't preclude you from looking for those opportunities and considering them as and when they do arise.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking in this case that this person's already a Malaysian lawyer who's already working in-house in Singapore. So perhaps he could try and talk that into his applications and possibly that would mean that he might be able to hit the ground running a little bit quicker. Yeah.
So even sort of prior to getting reaccredited, I know that, for instance, a lot of lawyers, sort of when I was in the banking team, harking back to that experience, would be qualified in the UK, but not Australia. And that accreditation process would take place sort of later in the piece after they'd already started working. So perhaps looking at sort of global or international firms and organizations who might have capacity to accommodate that is an option.
Thank you. This is a question from someone who's Australian born and they're heading overseas to the UK and they want to know, how do Australians come across in a workplace setting compared to overseas, and how would you leverage that in the UK? So is that, I think, kind of looking around the employability of an Australian in the UK? So, yeah.
I'm happy to sort of take this one, and Kelvin might have a little bit more experience in terms of the kind of law that is practiced. I think there's a lot of transferability in terms of practicing in Australia and practicing in the UK. I've got a large number of friends who've gone through the Australian system, got a couple of years of practice in Australia, and then gone overseas, and that experience is really valued because a lot of it is international law that they practice in firms across the pond, if I could say so. But I think in terms of how people view Australians, I think they view them as really quite hardworking, and I think we fit quite easily into the culture as well, because the UK is also really quite multiculturally diverse. So that's one thing that is really quite similar to the Australian jurisdiction. I think it's more about making sure you've got just a little bit of experience here in Australia before you start applying to those jobs overseas. But I think once you get there, all of the friends who I've had go overseas and practice in the UK are really enjoying it. They fit really well into those environments. Yeah, so I think it's a really great idea if that's something you want to pursue, and it just really will broaden and expand your horizons as a lawyer as well.
Thank you.
Agreed.
The question, yeah, sorry, Kelvin.
Just very briefly, I agree with what Joanna said. I think
Yeah.
Australians have a reputation for being very frank and practical, but also easygoing, such that they fit in well anywhere. I've got a number of colleagues who've done comments in the UK, but also vice versa, such that there is a high degree of transferability.
This is a question about someone has asked, is there such a thing as making an international move too early on in one's legal career? And do employers prefer someone who has more experience, i.e. 5 years plus post-admission?
I think it just really depends on what the particular employer is looking for. Some employers are actually quite keen to take you on if you've got at least 2 years of experience, and some are looking for a little bit more senior positions. So I think with these sorts of opportunities, you'd be really well placed to talk to legal recruiters who work across the board with international firms looking to recruit, and they'd have a really good understanding of what that particular employer is looking for. And then you'll have a better idea of what to expect and I guess how to go about that. But I think it is really important to make sure you get as much experience in Australia as possible so that you get that 2-year supervision course removed from your practicing certificate. I think that's a real key in terms of when employers are looking to employ you. They want to make sure that you don't come with any additional strings attached. But yeah, definitely have a chat to recruiters. Gatehouse Legal Recruitment is fantastic. They do a lot of work with firms who have offices internationally, and they're constantly putting out ads for firms that are wanting to employ Australian solicitors to go overseas. So definitely put yourself out there, get in touch with recruiters and just get a better understanding of the market.
Okay,
once again, just building on what Joanna said, I agree that you probably want some base of experience before immediately striking out. They're unlikely to recruit you right off the bat, except for instance, those Hong Kong traineeships. So I myself regularly get contacted by recruiters looking to hire for roles in sort of the US, the UK, Japan, the Cayman Islands, probably because that's a tax haven. So I think the opportunities really open up a couple of years down the track.
Thank you. All right, some of the questions are quite involved and long, so I probably will leave those ones for the moment. What are the best master's degree to follow at Victoria as a migrant who has done a foreign law degree? That's a difficult one. So best master's degrees in law, I'm thinking.
Depends on your area of practice or area of interest. So I am pursuing a master's degree with the College of Law, the applied law in Wills and Estates, because that's my area. So depending on what your area of interest is.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm flicking through them all. There's another one here about, do you need to be qualified in another jurisdiction to work in international law?
So generally, based on my experience, yes, they'll be qualified in another jurisdiction. And if they're to practice in Australia, it has to be sort of under sort of relatively strict supervision.
All right. As a corporate lawyer in India, what things and skills might I need in Australia? So that I think that's a harder question, I suppose, depending on what area of law, isn't it? But that would be the transferable skills.
Yeah, I think the same as the previous question. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what the process would be if I wanted to work as a lawyer in Singapore or any other city or country? I'm currently 1 year post-admission working in corporate law in Brisbane and very interested in working overseas. So practicing in Singapore or any other country.
Joanna know this? Yeah.
I think the real key with that is to just make sure, like, it's great that you've already got a position working in corporate law, but you'll be really wanting to look for firms that have offices in different countries. I think that's the best way to go about it, because once you've set yourself up in a firm that's international, you can really have your pick in terms of where you go. And if Singapore is particularly interesting to you, don't be afraid to have a chat to the partners and talk to them about why you'd be interested in going there. There's a lot of movement up and down between offices, because I think that really builds the workforce and builds us as lawyers as well. So most firms are really quite keen to do an exchange. A lot of Singaporeans come here, a lot of Australians go to Singapore. So I think just really set yourself up in a firm that you know has offices in those countries that you're interested in practicing in, and then go from there by having those conversations.
And just one further comment on Singapore. I understand it's a very popular jurisdiction for arbitration, especially now that Hong Kong is viewed as having a degree of regulatory uncertainty. So it'll, you guess you have to play to your strengths. There's a lot of banking and finance and commerce that runs through Singapore, and that sort of arbitration work. So if you've got expertise in those fields, that will be very favorably regarded.
Okay. Just in terms of Simran, someone has asked the single subjects that you studied at Deakin University. How recently was it? Would online courses be offered if not due to COVID?
I think I completed in 2020, and it was online, and it continued to be offered through COVID as well. Yeah, so get in touch with Deakin, and I think other universities also, including Victorian and a couple of others, are also the option. So maybe you would want to research and on their websites and look at if they have the online option. But Deakin is quite a popular one. Yeah.
Okay, just we're coming to an end, so I'll probably just do one or two last questions. But this individual just wants to know about job search websites for legal roles apart from Seek. They're based in Hong Kong. So yeah, I'm just trying to think of some of the kind of the global websites. So you probably look at some of the legal recruiters. I mean, there's Glassdoor and there's Legal Jobs.
I think LinkedIn is a good option. If you have your profile on LinkedIn, that has the option of, it'll always throw up the relevant jobs for you as depending on your profile. That's another one.
One last question, just the opportunities that are beneficial for a new foreign lawyer. So I suppose that would just depend, wouldn't it, on the person's background and what areas they'd worked, and also taking into account what Joanna was talking about before, what, you know, her passion, or what this person's passion and areas of interest are as well.
In addition to that, I would really, if you're in Australia, I would really recommend joining organisations like the Asian Australian Lawyers Association or Victorian Lawyers, because from there you have a wide depth of professionals who've been working in a myriad of different areas of law. So you actually meet so many different people, and a lot of the job search actually doesn't happen on Seek. I think most of the jobs that are advertised, it goes through word of mouth, it goes through sharing with your professional network on LinkedIn, and people just sort of tagging you in an ad saying, I think you'd be great for this. I've had past students or mentees of mine get jobs that way when I've seen an opportunity that I think that they'd be really good for, and I just tag them in the job ad on LinkedIn, and that's your sort of leg in a little bit. It's really I hate to say this, but it really is quite a bit about who you know and really putting yourself out there, especially in the era of COVID. It's important to make use of those things like LinkedIn, where everyone's online, everyone's really actually quite happy to chat to you and to give their the benefit of their experience to you. So make use of those online platforms and network as much as you can, because that's really very beneficial.
Absolutely. And I think I recently heard someone say it's not even about who you know, it's about who knows you. So that's very much about the building your profile. Okay, someone just said Jobs DB for Hong Kong recruiting websites. Is there an Australia International Lawyers Network? Good question.
involved in a number of diversity-related organizations. So I'm also part of the LIV Diversity Committee, as well as Joanna, actually. I don't believe so off the top of my head, but
that's a good question. Yeah. And one last question, sorry, I can't help myself. What are the fields in demand for lawyers who are migrants? So are there any areas that perhaps are going to be, better than others?
So I think there are certainly some niches that you can seek to exploit, which take advantage of your cultural background. Migration law, obviously having that cultural background, understanding those nuances, as well as the linguistic skills can be an advantage. And for similar reasons, I know a lot of lawyers in real estate often cater to clients from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And often these are firms which are sort of boutique firms that service such clients from such backgrounds on an almost dedicated basis. That said, I think a lot of people do want to avoid being pigeonholed and essentialized down just to that. They want to be known for their skills as a lawyer, not just a lawyer who's from that cultural background.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we can't get through all the questions, but I will have a look at those and see whether I can find answers for those. So please just be patient. I was just going to say, just to sum up and finish, if I just went around to each of you now, and if you just said in a very, very like summary form, what would be your advice, or what would be your one pearl of advice or wisdom? I mean, you've covered probably a lot already, but if there was just one piece of advice, do you think that's led you to where you are and has kept you going, what would that be?
I think for me, it's just not being afraid to take a risk, because you never know where that first step will lead you. So for me, when I started as a lawyer, that first job led to my next job, and then that next job led me to Victorian Women Lawyers, and Victorian Women Lawyers afforded me the opportunity to be the co-chair. And then from there, I got, associated with the College of Law as a mentor, and then I'm now a lecturer at the College of Law. So you can really see that trajectory. It might seem like one step, but that one step could have a resounding impact throughout the rest of your legal career. So don't be afraid to say yes. Don't be afraid to take a risk. Even if you think you're not up for the job, just take it and you figure it out as you go along, because we're always just all figuring it out. Even though we're, well into our legal careers, we're still figuring it out. So you're not alone.
Yeah, adding to that, I think adding to what Joanna said, I would say, do not be afraid of failures, as I mentioned previously as well. That's very important, not to give up. And one important thing which I think I missed on saying was, seek mentors. There's a strong need for fulfillment in each one of us. And most people in general do want to help. So don't hesitate to, approach people, who have been there, done that, and, connect with them, and they'll be happy to be a part of your journey. You never know, just connect with them, just, ask for a cup of, meet up or a cup of coffee with them, or connect somehow, the most to lose will be if they say no, it's okay. They might be busy. But I would say seek out mentors.
Lovely. And Kelvin?
I think my pearl of wisdom, if I would distill it down to one thing, would be don't give up. Like job hunting is undeniably tough, but it gets easier. And like many other things, the more you do, the better you get at it.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate each and every one of you in terms of your contribution today. I think it's been very inspirational, and I think that it will give people hope and the realization that there's a lot of obstacles, but through just keeping on going, it's definitely worth it, and there's so much positives here. So thank you very much, and we will we'll leave it there. If there's any other questions or queries in the meantime, just feel free to get in touch with me. My name is Susan Pincus, and I'm at the College of Law. So I look forward to meeting you again at another one of our webinars. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.